Good morning and welcome to Mets 360 here on Riverside. I'm your host, Brian Jura, and we had a 1 week hiatus. I had some personal stuff going on, and I was unable to do last week's scheduled podcast with Stephen. So I'm very pleased to be able to bring him back today, and hopefully we can make up for lost time. So, Stephen, thanks for your patience. Thanks for waiting through this stuff with me, and I hope you're ready to go.
Brian, I'm always ready to go, life gets in the way of what we'd like it to do, but that's what life's all about. So glad we could get this together here, and as you know, I am always happy to talk about the Mets. So you've that's a big sweet spot in my life for since the beginning. So happy to be here.
All right, well, let's get right into it. In the second game of the doubleheader last night, Brandon Nimmo returned to the leadoff spot, had a two-hit game, including a grand slam. Do you think it makes any difference where Nimmo bats in the order?
Well, not really. Um, he has shown, over not this year last, but he has shown that he can be a good leadoff hitter. And while one game doesn't really define his batting position, I keep him in that spot for the present time. I mean, it's winning a game these days has been a great good luck charm. And Lindor will get plenty of at bats in the number two hole. Conversely, Nimmo has off and on shown that he really can hit the crap out of the ball. And I think that he would not be a bad choice hitting behind Alonso in the cleanup spot. I think the bottom line is, these players need to hit. The second game last night, they got some production from the back end of the lineup, which for the Mets purposes means they didn't swing the bat and they walked because getting hits is very rare these days. And then Nimmo certainly made the best of it. And I think the Mets needed to shake things up a little bit, and I'll certainly happy to take the win, especially after that first game. The good part about working during the day is not having to actually view that first game, which was it seemed to go well for 5 innings. Then Reed Garrett came in and seemed like he was pitching opposite hand, almost as bad. Actually, he was worse than Travis Jankowski the other night, mopping up
Oh,
against the Pirates. And kudos for Blake Tidwell in the second game for really stepping up and showing that maybe he's got something. But back to the original question. Sorry, it's so hard to digress with the Mets. I think Nimmo can hit anywhere in the lineup, and I like his ability to get on base, even though maybe the statistics don't bear it out. I love him running down to first base on a walk, a la Pete Rose. I just think they need to not be in a team slump like they're doing. So I'm happy to have Nimmo get on base and also have his power to knock in the people at the end of the order if they eventually do get on base.
now, I guess I'm greedy when it comes to Nimmo because I want to see him draw walks and have that high on base percentage. And it seems like he makes more of an effort to get walks when he's batting either first or second compared to when he's batting fifth. I think he buys too much into that Keith Hernandez view of things where if you're batting fifth in the order, you need to be focused on power more than anything else. I think he needs to focus on getting on base, and then when the cookie comes, he needs to be ready to drill it. And I see no reason why he couldn't have the 300, 400, 500 triple slash line. But in order to get that 400 on base percentage, he needs to walk more than he does when uh, when he's hitting lower in the order.
Agree, and I'd still like it to see him make a little bit better use of his speed. I mean, he's not a blazer, but he's not slow. And as you know, I love the concept of small ball, especially since the Mets generally are not bashing zillions of home runs. God forbid somebody should start a game and bunt just as a surprise. Yeah, I like Nemo. I know he's your favorite, and I'll still stand back and say the contract he signed, it was a good contract, and I'm happy to have him on the team. So he just has to hit like the rest of the team, and then all the angst that we have goes away. If they would just get 4 or 5 runs a game, they'll win most of their games.
So you mentioned Nimmo and stealing. He's never been a great base stealer, which I think has been a surprise to most of us. But I believe I saw where he stole six bases in June, which is a pretty darn good total. I mean, 6 month season, if he steals six bases every month, that's 36 steals. I think we'd all be thrilled if Nimmo did that.
Absolutely. I laugh that he's not stealing, but Juan Soto stole a base. And I don't think Juan has ever been known as a base stealer, mostly because he's trotting around the bases with a home run or hitting a ball in the gap. But yeah, keep your chin up on this team.
All right, well, I'd like to keep my chin up with Tyrone Taylor because I think he's a good player, but the bottom line is he's not hitting. So, do you like how Carlos Mendoza is handling playing time with Tyrone Taylor and the three youngsters?
Yeah, I do. It's difficult to overlook what Taylor brings to the table from a defensive standpoint. He's got a great glove. I think he gets to balls that others might not. But you just can't be happy with he's hitting under 230. I think his OPS is close to 600. I like his stolen bases. I think he's got 9 or 10. I don't like his strikeouts or his sub 300 on base percentage. I think that when Taylor is in, and there are runners on base, they need to think small ball with him. They need to think these players, as he hits at the end of the lineup, do something to produce a run instead of everybody trying to hit the ball out. And he does have some power. So, I'm always shocked that this team, refuses to bunt or try to squeeze a runner home. They should do it more than they're doing it. But I don't think Mendoza has a choice. He could put Nimmo in center field, but with Nimmo's plantar fasciitis, and maybe it's still just not totally healed, and he just doesn't rely on Nimmo. But Nimmo played a pretty darn good center field for at least 2 or 3 years, and I would not have an issue with him, spotting a little time over there. I think McNeil shows his athletic ability and his versatility by playing wherever they ask him to play. And I thought he did a good job last year in the corner positions, but I've been very impressed with his play in center field. Not the least of it was climbing the wall that day to snag a home run. That shows good athletic ability. Will he get to as many balls as Taylor? Absolutely not. But I think that he's a good person to put out there. The way he's been hitting lately, you need to keep him in the lineup and hope one of the other baby Mets can play second base and actually produce something. I think the Mets need to, and then I'll get to Marte. I think the Mets need to snag a Cedric Mullins from the Orioles to play center field. He can hit, he can field, and then he teams up with Taylor when it need to be. And then I see McNeil getting more playing time in center, but he can also move to other places. Starling Marte, I can't think of a more frustrating person on the team this year, unless it was Jared Young, who drove me absolutely crazy. I think it's time for Marte to be gone. I mean, at this point, they owe him probably $10+ million for half a season. And if they could get, I keep having this pipe dream that some team's going to say, oh, he'd be a great bench piece. He could play off. He's worth $5 million for the rest of the season, because that's probably not going to happen. But at this point, if the Mets ate eight of his $10 million versus all 20, I think they'd be better off dumping him. He's a great example of giving a contract to someone who will soon be on the other side of 30. And that number, I never really thought of it much except for the last couple of years. The other side of 30 is like quicksand for most baseball players. I was never thrilled with Marte signing, in the first place. But yeah, I just don't have any confidence when he's in the lineup. He just is simply not doing much, even though when you look at his stats from a numeric standpoint, they're not bad. But if you watch him in the game, you're just disappointed. So I think Mendoza's doing a good job. I'd love to have seen, like Mauricio and Acuna. I'd like to see them bring an outfielder's glove and see if they could play out there as an alternative, but that's not going to happen this year.
All right, so what's your take on the decision to demote Francisco Alvarez? And do you still hold out any hope for him being a solid impact contributor here in 2025?
Well, I'm a good Alvarez fan. I mean, the hardest thing to remember is he's only 23 years old, which is really hard to comprehend. He came up, he was what, 21, and that's pretty young. He didn't have that much experience at the AAA level, and they say that's really important. But he came up with a home run explosion, 25 homers in his first season. So it's really not unreasonable to expect him to continue to be a home run hitter. But, even with dealing with injuries, 3 home runs and 11 RBI simply does not cut it from your starting catcher. He has had some strong moments this season throwing out runners. And then there are the pass balls that go by. So he kind of drives me a little crazy. But I do expect, I expect them to work with him down at AAA. I think we've all seen the video of a big home run he's already crashed at Syracuse. There's no doubt he can hit at Syracuse. There's no doubt Beatty and Mauricio could pound the ball at Syracuse. And for some reason, they come up to the big club, you know, especially this year. And I'm not sure what happens. Maybe it's a little kryptonite at City Field, but it definitely is a step up once you come to the big leagues from even AAA. But I expect Alvarez to be back this year. I expect him to make an impact. I wouldn't have an issue if he was not the home run hitter we all thought he was, but I think he should be getting 18 to 20 home runs and maybe become a gap doubles hitter. That would work great. And you can't be unhappy with Luis Torrens behind the plate, but he's hitting something like 220 with a little over 600 OPS. Solid defender, but they need some offense from the end of the lineup. And I think Hayden Senger was in the second game and he got a rare hit for the Mets, and he holds his own defensively. But part of me wants to see, do we have any catching prospects that we can come up to back up and play a game? I do see Alvarez coming through for the Mets, but then the problem with me is my glass is always half full, even when there's a crack in it. And having rooted for so many bad Met teams, if you're a Met fan, you have to be an optimist. So that's what I said. But I think Alvarez, there's still time for him to make an impact. I think he calls a good game. I think he has improved defensively. But gosh, we need some hits out of that position.
Do you think the Mets were more disappointed in Alvarez offensively or defensively?
I think offensively. I mean, I think he still frames well. I think, I think he's thrown out runners better. Maybe he got, schooled by Torrens, but I think the same with Mark Vientos. I think they said, wait a minute, we should get 25 home runs from both of these guys. We will have a devastating long lineup, considering those guys should be hitting sixth, seventh, towards the end, and then you suffer a little bit with maybe one, maybe two, poor hitters. I think
All right, well, let's switch over to the pitching side of things. What are your initial thoughts on Frankie Montas, having watched one pretty good start and one absolute stinker?
well, I think we were all thrilled after his first outing. And it kind of set my mind at ease because I've never liked his signing. I know David Stearns is a reclamation project guy, but this one I didn't really like. But no runs, 3 walks, which is par for the course for the Mets. And I had no issue taking him out after 80 pitches, even though there was a lot of conversation, even in our game chat, wondering why he didn't go out for the 6th inning. I mean, the good part is he woke up without pain the next day and he took his next start. Well, now his next start looked a lot more like a rehab start that he struggled with down before he came up. I'm not sure if he regressed or if it's just part of the rehab process, but certainly he'll go out for his next start. And I think off of his first start, I think there's hope that he will come in and help this very depleted starting rotation. I think that the Montas we saw in his first game back is the Montas that Stearns saw when they signed him. And unfortunately, we haven't gotten to see anything yet. But it reminds me of Quintana when he came up after missing a lot of the season. He was pretty strong. So I'm hoping that Montas continues to be a good part of this rotation. And with, Sean Manaea due back and Senga close behind, maybe we could take a breath from this decimated pitching staff. And I'm also still trying to figure out who's going to go to the pen or who's going to go down to AAA when Manaea and Senga both return.
So speaking of Senga, everything seemed to fall apart here for the Mets here in the past 2 to 3 weeks once he got injured. Do you think if Senga didn't come down wrong on the base and hurt himself, that the club may not be 4-14 in their last 18 games?
That's an awfully nice thought to think one person could make that difference. But that being said, and Pete Alonso took a lot of guff for the throw, but I mean Senga admitted that the injury happened on the step before he hit the bag. Now, whether that was something lost in translation or it really is the truth, you can't blame Alonso for the injury. But instead, perhaps we should be looking at the fragility of Senga. He has been a pretty injured pitcher in, the one year he was injured and no one could talk to him about the injury and had a rehab by himself and he missed most of the season. And last year, then he comes back and he stinks up the joint. So, he might be just a fragile pitcher considering that they they pitched every 6th day, not every 5th day. And maybe they coddled him a little bit, but maybe they would have been, not 4-14. Maybe they would have been, 7-11. I think that it also falls on the hitting, not the pitching. You know what? Really, so while Alonso took some blame for that errant throw. And we know, despite that, I love him in the field, he's not a great fielder when it comes to that. I think what falls on Alonso is he stopped hitting during the stretch, along with the bottom of the order sort of being on vacation when it was their turn to go to the plate. I've not forgotten that Alonso carried this team at the beginning of the season while Soto was struggling. And thankfully, Soto was back. Now, they could have won, a number of games during the stretch. But again, their relievers are tired and overused. Expecting 9 to 12 outs from the pen every night is, I think, a terrible recipe for success. They need more games where the starter goes 7 or 8, or any games where the starter goes 7 or 8, or I'm afraid this team's not going to make it as far as they did last year. And it's amazing that this team goes stretches when they seem to go into a team hitting slump. I've never really seen that before, where the whole team decides we're not going to hit this week, or just a few people. And it's hard to figure out why. But again, this will be this is on their coaching staff to get them out of it. But I think with Senga, going back to him and his sub 2 ERA, I think there's no doubt that they could have had an opportunity to turn two badly pitched games into two well pitched games, and then success breeds success. And when the teams when their competition, but yeah, I think it's unfortunate what happened to Senga, and I hope he comes back and is the same pitcher he was.
So you were wondering if anything might have been lost in translation when Senga was talking about the play where he got hurt. I think it was very clear that Senga was not blaming Alonso for the injury. I think that instead of wondering if something was lost in translation, we should be wondering if he was just being a good teammate, not throwing one of his fellow teammates under the bus, which, maybe it's a cultural thing. Maybe that's the way that it really did indeed happen. I don't think any of us outside of the trainers and physicians know what the truth is, but I think it was pretty clear that Senga did not blame Alonso for the throw.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think it was certainly the right thing to do, even if it wasn't accurate, or even if he deep down feels. So I think he did, protect his teammate. And the loss in translation, excuse me, was sort of just a little goofy comment on my part. I am baffled that so many players still need a translator. And I'm not being, xenophobic about being American and all that. I think, Rivera for the Yankees, there's a story about him early on in his career when he's coming up the minors, and he doesn't understand English, and he's realizing he's on the mound and he's got to communicate with his infielders and other players, and a couple of players took him under their wing and really force fed him to learn English so he could play the game. It wasn't just, and I think the players understand a lot more, but they just feel uncomfortable speaking the language. But I've really never seen so many players. The team must have to employ so many different interpreters, just to understand what's going on. The other thing that, and it's nothing to do with translation, I laugh all the time now when you see a conference at the mound and everybody's got their glove in front of their face, and then especially like on a Turner broadcast or an Apple broadcast, the camera is right in their face, like looking for them to say something, to give up some hint of what's going on. So it's a very strange thing how the world has evolved into so many different languages, which is great for the game, but not everybody understanding what they're saying. So maybe sometimes things are lost in transition as they're getting information from their coaching staff as well.
When I see those conferences on the mound that you just referenced where they're all talking into their gloves, it reminds me of one of the gangster movies. And I want to say it's Casino, but I'm not 100% sure, where they have an informant in the police department who tells them, they're reading your lips. So then from that
Yeah.
point on, everybody is covering up their lips talking. So it's like the mob world and the baseball world coming together. But you mentioned something that I want to transition and talk about, and that's the bullpen. I think we've just kind of lumped everything into the bullpen. The bullpen's been leaking oil, hasn't been performing well in June at all. but I think it's really two guys, and that's Huascar Brazoban and Reed Garrett, who have both just really fallen on hard times. But the flip side of that is we've seen several nice outings from Dedniel Nunez, who was such a big part of last year's success while he was healthy. So, what do you see the rest of the year with those three relievers?
Well, I think, Brazoban got the start yesterday for an inning. I mean, that whole concept, I just still don't understand when they have a starter and they run like the last thing the Mets need to do is run through five relievers in a game. I know it's a necessary evil with McGill down and Canning out for the year and non-reliability. But I think the extolled in the early part of the season when no one got a run off them, similarly to the starting pitchers who were like the first, best in the league. I think some of this, um, you know, and Reed Garrett is some of these days, it's almost like he's throwing opposite hand. I think a lot of this comes from clearly, in my mind, from overuse of this generation's much softer pitchers. And I know, me. I tend to live a little bit in the past as to what I've seen through my life. But there are plenty of pitchers who are good for an inning and then need rest. There's some who could take the ball for a few innings, a few days in a row, and that works for them. The fragility of today's pitchers is really unheard of. And I believe part of the issue has become the money that they're paying and not wanting to have injuries. And I know the team takes out insurance on players. And first I thought they only took out insurance on like their star players, but essentially they take out policies on most of their players unless they can't be insured because of pre-existing conditions. So while that helps protect the financial investment, it doesn't help having a substandard player on the roster in the big club. I think we're dealing with overuse with Brazoban and Garrett, and they've had some tough outings. I mean, the other day, Garrett stunk up the joint with two-thirds of an inning, giving up 3 hits and 4 runs on one swing. Of course, he walked the batter, and the biggest issue is that he's just not throwing strikes, and that's just not acceptable, except for instances where you want to throw the ball in the dirt, or you want to throw a high pitch to get a strikeout. There was a time when no one scored off of Garrett, and hopefully he can get back to that. And then they brought up, last week, feel good story, Jonathan Pintaro, who could not get 3 outs with 29 pitches. With a 7-1 lead, he should be throwing the ball over the plate, which is a problem that they tend not to throw strikes. Let the fielders have a chance to do that. Now, Dedniel Nunez, he had a strong year last year, but sometimes he scares me when he's in. He's another pitcher that's not quite back to where he should be. I do see the Mets picking up a reliever or two at the deadline to add to Brooks Raley if he does come back, but they really have no choice since most of the relievers in a funk. And I'm sorry, Dickie Lovelady, he should be bounced from the roster based on his name alone. But his 9 ERA doesn't help the matters either. So I think that and it's not just the pen again to get 9 to 12 outs every night means you got to use a lot of relievers, and the relievers are just not made to go multiple innings, multiple days in a row. So again, it points back to needing starters to go longer, even though in the first part of the season when they were flying high, the starters went 4, 5, maybe 6 innings, and the relievers jumped in. I think this is an overuse situation. So really, it starts again with the starters stepping up. And of course, the Mets scoring runs would be nice too.
They say in the NFL that no one is as popular as the backup quarterback. And it seems to me that the baseball equivalent of that would be that the guys in the minor leagues are all stars and they're all going to be saviors. There's been a lot of buzz here recently about a couple of Mets minor league pitchers and Nolan McLean and Jonah Tong. Do you see either of those pitching for the Mets this season?
I would certainly hope so. The Mets have never been ones to rush a prospect up to the big club. And I've said this a number of times. David Stearns knows a lot more about baseball than I do. Even though we all think we're armchair managers and armchair GMs, he really is a great judge of talent. As good as McLean has been pitching, I'm baffled at not giving him one of these spot starts when we need a fresh arm. What's the worst that can happen? He gets pounded and we realize he's not ready. I don't buy into the old logic or adage that it would mess with his psyche if he failed. And instead, I think it could be a motivating factor. What if he does well and we can plug him into the rotation at a time when, they are so desperate for pitching? We won't know till we try. Now, he does average 4 walks a game, which is not good, which means he'd fit right in with the rest of the Mets staff. If you go to Jonah Tong down in AA, I'm baffled that he's not at AAA and to show what he can do. He's only 22, but clearly he's overmatching the competition at Binghamton and has nothing else to prove there. So I think he's 6-3 with a 1.73 ERA and an under one. Actually, it's 0.91 whip. He's allowed 2 home runs in 73 innings. And while he gives up walks, so he fits perfectly, he's a strikeout machine, averaging something like 14 over 9 innings. So he needs to move up to Syracuse to see what he can do. And after 4 or 5 starts at AAA, if he does well, I don't see any reason not to give him a spot start and bring him up. Now, I want you to know I'm not offering a comparison to the olden days, but Dwight Gooden was just 19 when he made his major league debut. And I don't want to, have Jonah Tong and Dwight Gooden necessarily in the same sentence because Gooden was a one of a kind, but Tong needs to move up and this team needs to move their players maybe a little bit more quickly if they're ones that can have impact. There's a bunch of position players that are stuck in the minors because they keep forgetting how to hit at the next level. But I think McLean should be brought up at some point for a spot start, and Tong's got to go to AAA now. There's nothing left to prove at Binghamton.
All right, we've reached the crazy prediction time of the show. I'm going to give you a crazy prediction and then ask you to comment on it, and then we'll switch roles. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, my crazy prediction revolves around Sean Manaea. Last year, Manaea had a 3.47 ERA, which was the best mark of his career in any season with more than 5 starts. He seems to be on track to have well more than 5 starts, might have as many as 12. And my crazy prediction is he's going to beat last year's 3.40 and however many starts that he has for the Mets this year. So tell me, how crazy is that?
I don't think it's crazy at all. I think what we saw from Minaya last year was such a pleasant surprise. You bring a new pitcher in, you really don't know what he has to offer. You've seen his statistics from other teams, and then he comes out and he really headlines the staff. And he can pitch. He's not just a thrower, he can really pitch. And I think, going under 3.47 is something that's certainly attainable. I think he's also a pitcher who's going to go into the 6th and 7th inning and give this team a break. And so now it comes the rationalization of being a Met fan. Gee, we're already into July and he hasn't pitched yet. So he's going to be strong the rest of the season. So I think that's attainable. I don't think that's crazy at all. But conversely, if you went the other direction and you say Manai is going to get bombed, you could say, oh, he's older, he's missed part of the season, another injury. But you can make a logic. But I don't have an issue with what you said. I would agree.
All right, well, show me what a crazy prediction is like. What's yours?
Okay, so it's sort of crazy, but I've been thinking a lot about, one of my favorite players on the team doesn't know how to throw to the pitcher to cover first, Pete Alonso. As you know, I was really a big proponent on re-signing him. I almost didn't care the money that they spent because, again, it wasn't my money. But I think Alonso will finish the season with 40 home runs, and that's a lift from where he is now because they'll pitch around him. I think he'll be the all-time franchise home run leader. I think he's going to drive in between 115 and 120 runs. And then I think he's going to opt out of his $24 million contract for 2026. And the Mets are not going to give him the $32 million a year he'll be seeking. And he's going to probably get it from another team. So my crazy prediction is Alonso's going to have a great year. And he's going to want to resign, and the Mets are going to end up saying goodbye.
I don't think anything of that is out of line except maybe the very first thing that you mentioned with 40 home runs. That would be the only one that I wouldn't feel safe or comfortable about claiming that he'll reach. So I'll give you a partial crazy on that one, although it's certainly not out of the question, but a partly crazy on the first one, but not crazy on the rest.
I'll take partly crazy. I think it's a fair analysis.
All right. Well, let's talk about Juan Soto. Certainly, everyone focuses on the contract, and that's certainly not a an unfair thing to do. But I think it's clouding a little bit about how we're judging him. So Tell me what your thoughts were when the Mets signed him, along with what your thoughts are on what he's done this season.
Well, I've always felt as long as it wasn't my money, I was all in on signing Soto. $65 million and 15 years. It still is kind of shocking to me. I think poor Aaron Judge is saying, "Uh-oh, do I have an opt-out so I can increase my pay?" Because Aaron Judge is just by and far an unbelievable baseball player. So, Soto's slow start was disappointing. And even as it gave us the memory of Francisco Lindor's slow start, it didn't make me feel any better. The Yankees, who lost the Soto sweepstakes, had to go in another direction. And I think they picked up three players to fill the void in different positions and at about the same or less money than the Mets were paying Soto. Now that's worked for them. Now, so while Soto was slumping, they talked about that missing swagger that he usually has. Well, now we're seeing the Soto we expected to get with lots of home runs, RBIs, a great plate discipline. I never really realized how well he is at seeing pitchers, balls, and strikes. Something he should teach Alonso. I do worry about his fielding because he'll never win a gold glove or a glove of any color. But recently, he can hustle and he's made some decent plays. He scares me going into the corner to get a ball. He sort of looks like, do I want to pick it up? Do I want to let it hit the wall? What do I want to do with it? So I didn't realize that. I knew he wasn't a gold glover, but I thought he was maybe an above average fielder, but I'm not so sure about that. I would, again, it's not my money, but I think Soto is a great addition to this team. I think he rubs off on other players. They definitely needed another big bat, and I think his numbers are gonna continue to improve. And I think they need more help in their lineup, but I think he's such a solid player. They were saying, I think on the broadcast yesterday, you could put Nimmo here, you could put Soto there, you could put Alonso here, but but keep Soto batting third. He doesn't he doesn't like change. And given what he's done in the three hole in the last, month, I keep him there too. I think he's a 15 years. And we talk about players on the other side of 30. And so, he's 26. So in 5 years, he'll be 31. Here I am doing my basic math. And a few years after that, he's going to be on the other side of 30. So I'm not so sure why everyone thinks this generational talent is just going to be great throughout his contract. And I know at the end it's going to come back to haunt the Mets. And then again, there are opt outs. So, it's crazy to think that a player could opt out, and some people are saying, great. He opts out, which means we get out from under his salary. Maybe he opts out when he's in a decline, sort of like Edwin Diaz can opt out this year. Now that would be a terrible shocker because they can't replace him. But like you can't begrudge the players for trying to get money. But I think Soto has been a solid addition to this team after a rough start, and I see him being the generational talent they talk about for this Mets team, and I see him delivering a couple of World Series over the next, 5 or 7, 8 years, which really pays his salary.
There's one last player that I'd like for us to talk about, and that's Mark Vientos. He's back from the IL now, hasn't been off to a really great start, much like he wasn't off to a great start at the beginning of the season either. He was turning it around a little bit before he landed on the IL, but there's still some questions about Vientos and his long-term viability, especially given who else the Mets have on the team. So do you think he's a long-term answer for the Mets?
Well, I do. I do. And similar to Alvarez, it's hard not to expect Vientos to be a home run hitter, given the 27 he hit last year and the way he stepped up and the play. I think he had 5 home runs in the playoffs. So you're looking at someone who performed on the highest level, and I just always find it hard to believe that the players can forget how to hit, and harder to believe that it's just not as simple. And this is really simple. Probably not accurate as better coaching and watching hours of videotape. And what was I doing when I had great success? His first, 3, 4 games back, I think he's got one hit and, 16 at bats or 13 at bats. He's got 7 Ks, no walks. I think it just seems that he shouldn't need a spring training to get back into the swing of things, but I think he will still continue to have an impact. So Beatty is a better fielder at third base. And while I'd like to see, Beatty get more starts there, I do see Vientos getting some there, but I also see Vientos working his way to being the right-handed designated hitter. I'm not sure why teams shy away from younger players to be the DH. I think it's that, younger players should play their position. To me, it's a spot in the order that needs to be more productive. And all you're doing is asking a player to hit, nothing else. Francisco Lindor did an interview yesterday about he was the DH. And what was he doing with himself? He said he doesn't like the DH. And he was in the dugout and he was saying, you know what? I'm gonna swing a bat. I'm gonna do that. And he said, wait a minute, when I'm playing shortstop, I don't come into the dugout and swing a bat. He said, but what he was doing is he was sort of like running from side to side, making believe he was in the field, so he felt like he was involved in the game. So I get his perspective, but then you look at there's a player on the Cubs, Saya Suzuki, who lost his starting right field position, but embraced the DH spot. He's having an unbelievable season with like 23 homers and 70 RBIs in two-thirds, and that's with 84 hits. He had that production. With two-thirds of the at-bats that he had last year, he's already exceeded his home run total and about to pass his RBI total. So at age 30, he might start to rewrite the batting records for a DH. So I think that there is space for Vientos to take some reps at third base, even though he's not as good a defender as some of the others. He's got a great arm. And then, but it's so hard to think about, we're not going to put him out there. We're going to put Starling Marte in the DH position. It's time to send Marte packing if we can. But back to Vientos, I like him. I think he's young. Unless the Mets are at the point, and he's not a Pete Crow Armstrong. He's not that type of player. But unless the Mets are willing to say, okay, I'm going to send a Mauricio or a Vientos and a prospect to another team to get a star player, not just certainly not a rental, but get a star player to play third base. I think Vientos is going to continue to be in the mix, and I don't know what they have to do to get him hitting. I always say it's the hitters that aren't hitting or fielding or aren't running, but it's the coaches and the managers that take the fall for it. But I'm hoping they can straighten him out because I think he's got tremendous potential, as does Alvarez. And again, those guys hitting towards the end of the lineup make it a devastating lineup, which they don't have at the moment.
Well, thanks, Stephen, for joining us today, and thank you again for your patience with my situation last week and our inability to have this podcast then. Thanks again for showing up and for all that you do at Mets. I've often said that if I could clone MetSense and have 5 more readers like him, that would be great. I would say that if I could clone Stephen and have 5 more writers and contributors like him, that would be wonderful too. So thanks again, Stephen.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate the words, and I appreciate all that you do because Mets 360 has been in the last number of years such an important part of my Mets life. And I enjoy all of it. I enjoy doing the podcasts, and I agree. I'd like to get more people commenting, and we'll keep working on that. And appreciate the opportunity to do this podcast with you.
Excellent. And thank you to everyone who listened. And hopefully we will get back to our weekly editions of the podcast and we'll have one for you next week. All right. That's all from us this morning. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Goodbye.
Take care. Bye bye.